This is a Sandy Boy Productions podcast. Hey everybody, welcome to Why is Everyone Yelling with Lindsay Hine. I'm your host Lindsay and I'm so grateful you're here today. This is a podcast for parents or anybody helping raise kids. My hope is that this podcast will provide you with tools to help you in your everyday life with your kids as well as big picture things with your kids. We have a Facebook group called Why is Everyone Yelling? That is a great way to connect with this community so that we can support one another and grow together over there. Today you're listening to episode 15 and I'm talking with Katie Arnold. Katie is a returning guest to this show. This is her second time on the show. We talked in episode 9 about raising adventurous kids. And one of the topics I wanted to cover with Katie was kids in sports. Katie is the mother of 2. She is actually the 2018 Leadville 100 champion, and she's the author of the book Running Home, an incredible story. It's a memoir. Katie is a gifted writer. She's a regular contributor to Outside Magazine. Her stories have appeared in the New York Times, Men's Journal, ESPN Magazine, Marie Claire, Runner's World. One of her stories that inspired this conversation for me was a story she wrote in 2014 called Don't Let Youth Sports Hijack Your Life. That was one of the most read posts on Outside Online. What I walked away thinking about after this conversation is I want to make sure that I'm just staying curious and making sure I'm fully considering why I'm putting my kids into what sports and how I'm nurturing their love for sport, not just competition. I want active lifestyles to be a lifelong thing for my kids. And so nurturing that in a healthy way now feels really important to me. And I think Katie really hit some important points on that topic. And if you are enjoying this podcast, please take a quick moment and leave us a rating and review and share it with your friends. That will be a huge help in potential new listeners finding out about us. All right, enjoy my conversation with Katie Arnold. Well, today on the podcast, I'm excited to welcome back Katie Arnold to the show. Welcome to the show, Katie.
Hi, Lindsay. Thanks. Great to be here with you.
Yes, you said you just went up skiing this morning for the first time of the season. How was that?
Oh, it was great. Yeah, they opened our local ski mountain on Saturday, and we really didn't know, with COVID, if they were going to be able to open and what it would be like. And we took the kids up on yesterday, to ride the lifts. And oh my God, it felt like almost like the most normal thing we've done since the pandemic started. And we met up with some friends and, we were all masked, but it felt totally just like we always ski. It was so good to see the kids hanging out with their friends in like a freer way than we've been able to be. So I kind of got so into it that I went back up today and got my ski-mo gear out and was skinning up. And yeah, it's fun to have that in the mix. It's just fun to have another activity for the kids because I feel like we've been running out. Like I think I've flipped through our hikes in New Mexico book 100 times to try to find a new one. We've done them all.
Yeah, the nice thing about the masks, though, I was just saying this to my boys this morning because we went on, inspired by you, I keep trying to get my boys out on a walk or a bike ride before school. And my oldest was rollerblading. My second was on his bike. My third I had already taken to daycare. And then my fourth was still sleeping and my husband was home. So everybody was all over the place. But we were possibly going to meet up with a couple of friends to ride around with us. And so I was like, make sure you bring your masks. And we didn't end up meeting up with the friends, but they wore their masks anyway because it helps you stay warm.
It does. I know. I was skiing this morning, skinning up. Our mountain has a masks policy, even if you're skinning and not riding the chairs. And at first I was like, oh, this is hard to breathe. But then it does keep you warm.
Yeah.
It was keeping my chin warm. And I realized it's not that different from normal skiing when you usually have a buff or something. So yeah, I think there's I think that it's true, especially where you live and it's probably colder temps in the day. Like, and also yesterday we didn't need any sunblock
Oh,
because
yeah.
completely you could not see one patch of skin on our faces between our goggles and our masks.
Yeah.
There, eliminate the need for sunblock.
Well, so last time you came on the podcast, Katie, I knew we had so much to cover. And as we got into the conversation, I realized if we even tried to scratch the surface of this talking about kids in sports, that the conversation would end up being 2 hours, or we wouldn't get to talk about all the things we want to talk about, you know?
Right. Yeah, no, it's a huge subject. I think that a lot of us as parents are just trying to sort out like what's the right balance, what mix is right for each family. And of course it's totally different for every family, right? So there's just a different set of values and priorities that, we have as individuals and parents. But yeah, there's so much to talk about, kind of how to find the right balance, if there is such a thing, in, balancing kids' sports and organized sports with outdoor time and unstructured play time, that kind of thing. For me, I feel like I'm always looking at it with my girls and trying to make sure we have the right, maybe balance isn't the right word, but ratio.
Yeah. I think about this in everything with parenting. Okay. You have how did I look at things how did I think about things before I had kids? How did I think about them once I had kids, but my kids were really little? Like, oh, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. And then how am I thinking about it now that my kids are older and we're actually walking through those experiences? Because how many times do we look back and think, LOL, I thought I was going to do it this way?
Totally. Before my kids were born, I was like, I want to travel internationally every year. And we do go to Canada in the summer to see family, but I don't really count that because,
Yeah.
but I was thinking like a trip. And yeah, like that, when they're tiny and little, like it's so much more work. It's not a vacation, let's be real, until like it's always an adventure or a
Yeah.
trip. But the idea of going on vacation when you have little ones, it's a joke. But yeah, I look back and I think of some of these ambitions I had, and there will be a time for that. My kids are now of the age where we could, but of course we're not traveling.
Pandemic, yes.
So you just have to keep rolling with it.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. So my husband and I are pretty into sports. I would say we're both fairly athletic, and it's super fun to play. I just took a little school break for my kids, work break for me, and we played basketball a little bit, right before this interview. Yeah. And it's fun to do that. But there comes a time when, you do put your kids in organized sports. You do or you don't. Not everybody does. But I was always of that camp that, like, I am not putting my 3-year-old in soccer. Like, I am not toting people around and doing that until it really makes sense. So I'm curious for you, as your girls got to the age where you saw other families starting to put their kids in activities, how did you approach that?
Yeah, so I would say we're a lot like you guys. We're active. We've always been, my husband and I, like really outdoor athletes and kind of adventure athletes. So we come to the world and our lives from that perspective of like being outside, moving, being healthy, exploring, and having a relationship with the natural world are primary. And so, of course, we want our kids, to grow up doing sports and exposed to that. And, I grew up on the East Coast, New Jersey, suburbs, very traditional growing up. I played 3 different sports, different one with each season. So like I come to life as a parent, thinking like, okay, my kids are going to play sports. That's just like a given. So when they were little, how to get them, thinking about like when would we start them on that organized sports. I sort of thought I would be on the later side because just because we have this interest in other, cultivating interest in other kinds of sports that aren't organized, say like hiking or bike riding or, these kind of lifetime sports or family sports you can do. So that said, like, when soccer signups started, when I think Pippa, who's my older one, was like 4, I felt like this pressure
Mm-hmm.
to sign her up. And I don't know where that pressure was coming from. I'm guessing it was largely coming from myself. Because and this is where we as parents can bring our own baggage into our parenting dynamic, which is I didn't get to play soccer as a kid. When my parents were divorced and when my mom remarried and we moved to New Jersey, I was in first grade. And for some reason, my mom didn't sign me up. And then by the time I wanted to sign up, I felt like it was quote unquote too late. You know what I mean? That
Mm-hmm.
feeling of like all the kids have been playing. And that was limited thinking on my part, but I was 7 or 8, right? So I needed help with that mindset to shift it to be like, wait, most kids are, 7 or 8 years old, like, you'll catch up really quickly. But I had this idea that I missed out early, that I wasn't a soccer player. And, I wish I hadn't had that because probably I would have liked soccer. So I think my reaction then when Pippa was of that age was I wanted to give her, I didn't want her to have that same thing happen to her that happened to me, even though it was quite limited thinking on my part. Like it wasn't a real truth or accurate assessment of the situation. It just felt like that to me. So we signed her up young. And, watching like 4 or 5 year olds race around the field, it's fun. It's a fun outlet.
Mm-hmm.
And I think because we didn't have her in any other team sports, it was like a fall season thing. It was kind of just like a whim. And and she did it each season after that, but like their skills at that age for the most part are are like quite marginal. I think my guess would be like 1 in 10 kids would make a difference that they started so early.
Sure.
But what I noticed is that when her school friends joined in when they were probably like 8 or 9, there was not a whole lot of difference in the skills. Like those
Yes.
9 year olds caught up really fast to those early adopter kids, the kids who'd started really early. And so it was sort of like, you know, more, I think it was probably just like training us to be in that team mindset, but we didn't need to sign her up. I think that's the bottom line is that it was not too late, if she'd started in third grade, not by any long stretch of the imagination. But we as parents have that fear that like we're going to miss out or our kids will miss out. And so I think there's that tendency to put them into organized sports earlier than we need to, and earlier than probably we'll even see results. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I mean, I think there's a couple factors too, because I've kind of always sung this tune like I'm not going to be like toting my kids around to 5 different things, and if we start so young, then that's like all we're going to be doing. But I mean, I think a couple things like for my first kid, it was like, what else are we gonna do? Like, we want something to do on the weekend, like, and we want to get out of the house, and it's a really great learning experience
Totally.
to have to like be out there with your team and kind of start getting that first taste of what it means to be a teammate.
Yes.
But then again, now that I have 4, it's like my third and fourth kids, they are not going to be signing up for sports anytime soon because I'm not going to manage all those things. So I think my point with that though is that like there's really no right or wrong
No.
answer here. It's just like what makes most sense for your life in the time that you're in.
I think that's right. I think there's definitely no prescription, a single one size fits all for any family. But I think the most important factor is to be curious and be willing to sort of look under the hood of your own either assumptions or logic around starting your child early. Like, probably if I had really examined why I felt the need to put Pippa in soccer at like 4, I would have seen like, oh, it's because I feel like I missed out, but will she really miss out? It's hard to answer that when it's your first child, right? You don't know, like you're just completely winging it. Probably with when you're second, if you have another child who comes along, like if Pippa hadn't been in soccer, like we signed Maisie up for soccer because Pippa was doing it. So it
Yeah.
was like, might as well have 2 trips, 2 girls down there at the same time. But probably with the second one, you just know more and you kind of you have a better understanding of your motivations and like, and what your stuck points might be on like the stories you're telling yourself that may or may not be true. I mean, that said, I do think, of course, it's so great to have kids out playing and moving and getting that sort of fresh air and movement. I won't call it exercise. I mean, it is, but like kids just need to be like in motion a lot and kind of getting out there. And for us, right, like we knew that we would skew farther toward the end of like more outdoor sports, more family sports, more sort of adventure things than team. And so I felt they do need those team sports. Like I think to have exposure, like, and my thought was like one, when she was that age, and probably until like late elementary, now she's in middle school, like the idea is that she'd have one team sport a year and then the others would be skiing or mountain biking or whatnot, to round it out. But so I felt that I wanted to give her that team experience because it is so important to be a player, a team player, to have that respect for your coach and to be able to take instruction. All that is so important.
I love that idea, like having the one team sport and then, but also making sure that you're doing all like other activities as well,
Yes.
because that's one of the things I wanted to talk about is that the one sport specializing that you see some people
Yeah.
doing. And that's a topic I really struggle with. And here's why. So my son, he's doing soccer
Mhm.
and that's the sport that he has found the most interest in. And he's only 8. And so I'm kind of stuck in this place where I'm like, okay, so soccer's our thing with him, but we want him to do other sports.
Yeah.
However, we aren't willing to sign him up for like all these other sports to try them out while we're always doing soccer because there's like,
Mhm.
we're not going to be his taxi driver 24/7, right?
Right.
Before we really have to be. So it's kind of because so I was talking to my husband about this and I was like, well, what do we do then? Because we want to keep nurturing soccer. And he says, well, you just do one sport a season. And I'm like, well, soccer's fall and spring. So what do you do?
Yeah. Well, that was going to be my answer is like use the seasons as like the natural changeover. I think that's a really healthy way to be just as a human and especially as an adult. Like we just talked earlier, like I just started skiing. That's important to me to have like an off season in my running
Mm,
or a lower season of running and introduce skiing because it just gives your body a break. It also is mentally more stimulating. Like I was much more excited to go up the mountain this morning to ski than I would have been to run.
mm,
And so I think kids are the same, that we need diversity in our movements and also sort of for our mental health. So I would say, like your husband, use the seasons as a way to change. And I get it that they do spring and fall because that's the same thing in New Mexico. Is Pippa was playing fall soccer,
mm-hmm.
and I knew there was spring going on, but we just were like, you play in the fall.
Okay.
And but as she got older and the girl's skills got better,
Mm-hmm.
I felt like yes, she is missing out a little like on her soccer skills because she's not playing 2 seasons. But for us, she actually discovered lacrosse, which is the team sport I played in junior high and high school and college. And she fell in love with lacrosse. So that was sort of easy to be like, well, lacrosse is spring and soccer is the fall. And just, that the chips are going to fall where they do because she's making that choice. And if she's not as skilled at soccer, so be it. Like you kind of have to make that choice. But I think it becomes this sort of danger zone or like tricky spot when the sports go all year.
Mm-hmm.
I think is I mean, let's face it, a lot of it is like it's a business for these
Oh,
youth
sure.
sports. And so if they can have 2 seasons of soccer and sort of, send the message to parents like if your kids aren't playing both, they're gonna, not be at the skilled level or they're not going to play elite level or travel, you know that's it's a lot of it is this bottom line for the team sports. And so it comes down to like a little bit of a pushback from the parents and making conscious choices of like, okay, she's going to choose lacrosse in the spring, and soccer in the fall, and that's just a healthy balance for her, I think. Um, but yeah, it's tricky. Like if your child, like your son, it sounds like, would he play both seasons if he could? Like he's that into it.
Yeah, I think you would.
Yeah. Yeah. So maybe you try it, and then can you introduce something in the winter? Do you know what I mean? Like hockey or basketball or something, to sort of like mix it up.
Yeah, I think so. But I also think because I love what you're saying, and I relate this to our own running as adults too, is having like downtime, like having like off seasons,
Hmm.
where you say you go skiing, but I'm like, I also kind of love as a parent, like when soccer season wrapped up this fall, to just be like, we don't have organized sports right now.
Yes,
You know what I
right.
mean? Like
Yes.
we're going nowhere. Like there's no commitment to Saturday morning anything right now, which feels really nice. But that said, you can take a month and then hop back in.
Yeah, I mean, and think if you feel that, the kids
Oh,
must feel
right.
that too, right? Like they may not be able to articulate it, but like, oh wow, our Saturdays feel like, as a parent, it's like they feel more spacious. As soon as soccer ends, you're like, oh my God, we don't have to drive. Because for us, our fields are way on the other end of town.
Mhm.
And, it's just you're aware of the resources it takes to get your kids down there just from traveling and driving and emissions and like all those things that we think about or should be thinking about. And so when it ends, it's just that like relief, and then it's like, oh, now, and then there's that pause, and you probably want like a month off like you're saying, and then that interest in something, well, like maybe we should try skating, or is there something nearby, that we just sort of like learned. So important to keep a beginner's mind, I think, for all of us, like no matter where we are in terms of age, like as parents and children, to be willing to try new things and to try things never done before, and to go into it with that sort of openness of like, I don't know what this is going to be like. Like a friend of mine in St. Paul just signed up for ski lessons. She's in her mid 40s. And I
Oh,
was like,
fun.
I love that. Like, so maybe that winter you can have sort of like a season in between the two soccer seasons that's like a try anything, or like let's try something new, or a family sport season. Like for us, it's easier because we have skiing, just 30 minutes up the road. So that, like, if we have team sports in fall and spring, winter is like family time, and summer is the family time.
I love that. I love that idea. And I think that we have to be intentional about that. Like,
Yes.
we're not doing team sports right now. What is something that they might enjoy that's different, where they're moving their bodies? I mean, because
Mhm.
I've talked to so many professional runners on my podcast, and a common theme I hear, and I'm not saying that my kids or anybody's listening's kids are meant to be professional athletes, but like the common theme I hear is, I'm so grateful that my parents had me do multiple sports and not just dedicate myself to running from a young age, because I just feel like my body is much more capable and like nimble and durable and can do so many different movements because I did the different sports.
Definitely. And they say that kids need, all those different sports to, right, to work, like eye-hand coordination. Like if we just been running, I didn't either. Like, thank goodness, I've always run and loved it as like a personal thing. But growing up, I played tennis. Like I'd say my main sports were tennis, and then my team sport was lacrosse. And like, you know, thank goodness, because kids need eye-hand coordination. Like they need all those skills, and to be exposed to different sports, both individual, right? That has a different feel, like, when it's a one-on-one sport versus a team sport where, you need to be cognizant of all the other players on the field and sort of work with that dynamic. Yeah, I think it's really important for kids to diversify. In some of my reporting for Outside, I spoke to experts who were saying that if your child is specializing, and by that I think, this person meant like one sport year round,
Mm-hmm.
so not probably 2 seasons, but like 4 seasons. Before the age of 14, they are at risk, much greater risk of injury and burnout, and just losing that the joy for the sport, which is really ultimately the thing you want more than more than all the ribbons combined, right? Or any first place, state championship is like, do they really love it? Like, is it coming from the inside? Is it this intrinsic motivation? And that's at risk, I think, when you push kids to specialize too early. Like I know that some, gymnastics, I guess, gets a bad rap that like
Oh, yeah.
doing it year round and like many hours a day. And I just think, and the expert I was speaking to at the time was saying, there's a time and a place for that, but like late middle school, 14 years old is the time. Like if the child has the interest and it's coming from them, so not like the parents saying like you need to specialize in gymnastics and you're going to do it year round. But if the child wants to, that's probably the time to do it, but certainly not before. I mean, think of all the things that they'd be missing if they were doing just one sport from a very early age, which I think there's like an increasing number of kids who do that.
Yeah, the gymnastics thing is tough because, well, first of all, let's just say there is a very small percentage of the population that's going to end up being an Olympian. um, but
Right.
those women and men who do make it to the Olympics, like a lot of time those girls are like 14 or I don't know how old they are, but they're very young.
No.
So I'm sure that if there are kids or parents who have the slightest thought that that could be them, that they have that massive pressure
Yeah.
to go all in so young.
I know. It'd be interesting too to sort of like do some research into what that, those parents, if they were young athletes themselves, or
Yeah.
kind of what is that driving factor for them? Because I do think gymnastics is kind of in its own category.
Uh-huh.
It does seem to go year round from a very young age. I don't know if it's because it's an indoor sport,
Yeah.
right? So there's not like, it's not a weather driven sport,
Uh-huh.
and I think those weather driven sports are really helpful because, when there's snow in the winter, we ski and, and when it's nice out, we're playing outside. And so those indoor sports are tricky because you could go all year round, and I think many do, and that would just be a red flag, I think, or just a good reason to sort of start asking yourselves those more complicated questions of like, well, why are if you're putting your child who's not 12 even into one single sport all year round, like that's a good moment to sort of examine what your impetus is for that. Because I think that there's a risk that the child is missing out on other activities. There's a risk that it's driven by the parents. And there's a risk for injury and burnout.
Yeah, and like you said, other things, like not just other activities, just life.
Just
Like,
hanging out, being a kid.
yes. Just like running around with the neighbors because you are constantly at some sort of practice. You can't do that because you're always gone. Yeah, I mean, I remember kids growing up, and gymnastics is a big one where that was a thing.
Gymnastics is a big one. And like I know someone whose child was in gymnastics she was 7 and she was doing like 2 to 3 hours of training a day.
Mm.
That seems like a lot. I mean, there's no question that American kids are not moving as much as they need to. And there have
Yep.
been studies, and the recommendation is 1 hour of moderate, exercise or movement every day. And I think there was a report earlier this year, that came out that said 80% of American kids don't get that.
Wow.
And that's a huge number. And then of that 80%, there's a huge gender split, so that girls are getting far less than the boys, which is also a major red flag. So kids do, like I am 100%, we need to get our kids outside or indoors if it's winter and it's safe, moving every single day and an hour. And, moderate exercise is not, walking around the block. And so that's really important. But then I think it can go too far, in those rare cases where the kids are doing so much training, and I think that's just unnecessary at that age. And it's not probably a very healthy and balanced approach.
Well, and I like that you use that word training because I read the article that you wrote. There's an article that you wrote about a friend having you help her daughter run, and
Right.
you say, yes, but it's not going to be training. It's, we're going out and we're going for a run on the trails, but we're not calling this training. And I think that's something we should talk about is you've also written another article about encouraging play and not competition. And I think that it's so important that we teach our kids that, like you said earlier, this is for the joy of it. Ultimately, that's what it is. If we look at the longevity of our own running, if we're not doing it for the joy of it, what then are we doing it for?
Right. Right. I mean, if we're just doing it either to impress someone, or maybe as kids, like we thought our parents wanted us to run, or we are then trying to get, to win, to, impress our coaches, like that will carry you a pretty far away, right? Like you can get some miles, pun intended, on that, those motivations. But I think and they've done studies, the chances of you sticking with that, past your competitive, career, say in high school or even college, is pretty low. I mean, and so what I'm trying to do as a parent is to foster in my girls a love for being in motion, being like strong-bodied, confident girls who have a range of skills in lots of different sports. And so to expose them to lots of different things so that they can find the one or two or three things that they really love that bring them joy. And, or even to be kind of like my husband and me, like we really do lots of different things. And, we each do a couple things, pretty well, but we do, we have a pretty wide repertoire of outdoor sports that we do. And I think that's just, I hope that we'll be doing them. I plan on doing them my whole life. And that's what my hope would be for our girls, is to just raise them to be, really physical and embodied children who are comfortable in their bodies, who, know how to push themselves when needed and how to rest when needed. But I guess, just really to have a relationship with their physical selves. And that may sound so simplistic or obvious, but I feel like increasingly in our world where so much is virtual and there's so many ways that we can kind of bypass the physical experience, like we need, to have a relationship with ourselves. And sometimes I'll just ask my girls, like the other day I took my little one running with me and we just go 1.5 miles up and 1.5 miles back and in the arroyos, and it's just sand and trail. And so it's very casual. And on the way back to the car, and it was almost dark and we had our headlamps on, and she was like, "Mom, this just feels so natural to me to run." And I was like, I love that. That's what you want. Like, I don't care, we're not timing it. Like, she's not training for anything, but I was like, that's the feeling that you want to sort of help them lock into themselves. Like, oh, it feels natural to move and it feels good. And when I get home, I have those endorphins. I feel confident in the rest of my life. Kind of all the reasons that we as adults do our sports. We want that for our kids and for them to start to have that awareness, to sort of connect the two. Like, oh, when I move and when I go outside and ride my bike for an hour with a friend, I come home and I'm like ready to tackle my homework, or I have more energy, or I'm just happier.
Hey friends, a quick break here to let you know that this podcast is part of the Sandy Boy Productions network. We have 3 other shows in this network. If you are into running at all, we have 2 podcasts that you might enjoy. One is called I'll Have Another with Lindsay Hine, and that's where I interview runners and learn about their life. More than just running, but we talk about running quite a bit. And then we also have the Up and Running podcast with Lauren and Abby, and they're bringing you all the latest news in elite and professional distance running. And then we have the Illuminate podcast, co-hosted by myself, Kristen Sruer, and Emma Benner. Emma is heavily carrying that load over there, and she's doing an amazing job. That's a podcast where we are sharing stories of people who are doing positive, uplifting work in this world. You can learn more about those shows when you go to sandyboyproductions.com, and we have an Instagram page for Sandy Boy Productions. All right, friends, enjoy the rest of my conversation with Katie Arnold. I get stuck on this competition, like encourage play, not competition, because when my son plays soccer, he sometimes he's only 8, but he'll like zone out, and I'm like, wait, don't you want to win? I'm like, don't you want to make that goal? Or if he's done running up the field, then he just kind of like checks out for a minute, and I'm like, how do I cultivate this relationship with sport for him where he wants to work hard and winning is not all that matters, but it's still important to put his best foot forward for the rest of his teammates. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's so challenging.
Right. Well, it's tricky. And I think like that, that perspective, when I just heard you say that, I'm like, oh, that's because like I want to be I struggle with competition where it's like, if I get out there, like sometimes I just want to be able to like kick back and have fun, but I'm pretty competitive. Mm-hmm. So, letting your kids, first of all, I think that I think it happens with age. Like it seems like your children are exposed to lots of different sports, and you and your husband are both super engaged with their sports in a really healthy way. So I think those competitive impulses will sort of naturally start to coalesce. Because he's still really young at 8. And let him sort of like find his way into it. But I do think it's important, and I'm with you, like when you're on the field, like you should be trying your hardest.
Yeah, yeah.
And maybe it's not trying your hardest with the only goal being winning, but like you said, trying your hardest to, for your teammates' sake, or, just to teach yourself how important it is, like to give something your all, right? And like, so you don't have to leave the field thinking like, well, what if I tried a little harder? But to have the emphasis be on the feeling of being on the field and knowing you're trying your best and how good that feels inside versus like how good it feels to win.
Yes.
So I think that's a healthy way to encourage, right? Because I mean, I'm with you. If I see my daughter who's like, and she's not trying that hard, like I just get really irked on the sidelines. And then you start becoming like, you sort of yell and you're like a yeller. I mean, I'm definitely like, I can really yell on the sidelines. Like, I don't want anyone listening to think that I'm like, exempt from that. Like you get caught up.
Yes.
I think you want to see them, giving it, like I sort of think of it like wholehearted effort, like really put yourself into it and let go of what the results are going to be. So if the girls played hard and like were engaged and knew where the ball was and like were running a lot, like it doesn't matter if they win or lose.
Totally.
You know what I mean?
Yes, totally. I know. I've thought about that so much this past fall soccer season. And our big thing is we always say to him, when he goes out to the field, we say the 2 things we care about are that you have fun and that you work hard. Mm-hmm. And it's like I don't want to focus too much on the work hard part yet. This is like a life lesson. It's like you work hard for things you care about, and also it's like when you grow up and you work with other people and you're on a team with other people, you're not just working hard for yourself, you're working hard for your team.
Right. And those are the life lessons that, really team sports can help teach our children and why they're so healthy, because let's face it, most kids after we are going to age out of soccer, say, they'll play adult league, but like say after high school and fewer than after college won't be playing a team sport, but they will be playing a team sport like in life, which is like or being in a family. And so those skills of like applying yourself, like working hard and respecting your teammates or the people that you're with are so important. And so, yeah, I would just say like work hard, try your best. Like if my girls are having fun and trying their best, like that's a win, no matter what the scoreboard says.
For sure. It's funny you brought up that you're yelling on the sidelines, because I was going to ask you, what kind of sideline mom are you?
I'm mostly like, I'm pretty chill, but like I do get excited. I love watching them play, especially soccer, because I guess because I didn't play soccer. So I'm probably like foisting some of that onto them. But I get caught up. Like I love when they're like running fast with the ball
Uh-huh.
and make a good play. But I'm more an excited yeller. I'm definitely not like a mean coach yeller, like
Yeah.
I'm encouraging, or I just get caught up like that. I'm a passionate person. And so it's like, oh, it's really fun to watch my kids, but I don't coach from the sidelines. First of all, with soccer, I don't know anything about it. So
Yeah.
that's good. And then I do coach my girls playing lacrosse. And so like in that capacity, my yelling is sanctioned because I am the coach.
Oh, you are the actual coach.
I'm the coach. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um,
And I should say, like, with all of this, like, my girls have not played organized sports since March.
oh,
And
right.
we've had zero sports here. And I know it's different for everyone all over the country. And so we're in a real, like, team sports hiatus, which feels very spacious. And there's lots of opportunity to try different things, which, has been great. But I am cognizant that like we're missing that, and the
Hmm.
girls are missing that experience, and they're missing, quite frankly, out on skills.
Yeah.
And I think about that, but this is a statewide mandate, so no one's playing sports in New Mexico. And
Wow.
there was a sport, yeah, no, nothing. There was
Not any outdoor sports.
nope, no organized youth sports. Like we had lacrosse for our girls and like six other girls who were in their pod. And we did like, an 8 girl
Yeah.
once a week lacrosse, but that was just like an organized thing by us. But yeah, nothing. And I know, yeah, it's interesting. It just feels like we're in different countries because
Yeah.
whose kids are doing like multi-sports. I can't figure it out. Like, and there was a piece yesterday in the New York Times about how parents are grappling with whether or not to send their kids to sports. And I was like, well, some of us don't even like, that's
Have
not
the
even
option.
an option.
Yeah. Well,
Option.
we we started sending to soccer camp this summer, which was a godsend that it was right down the street from our house. We could literally walk 2
Hmm.
blocks to soccer.
Perfect.
Yeah, it was amazing. And I didn't bat an eye about it because it was outside in the summertime and
Yeah.
um I felt really comfortable with it. But it's interesting. The soccer camp that we did 4 weeks for my older son. It was like 9 to noon. I thought it was a really healthy amount of time and it was
Yeah. That's
temporary.
perfect.
Yeah. My number two kid, who was 5.5 at the time, he only lasted 1 week, but which was a healthy amount for him, I think. But my older son was really into it, and like with COVID, there was nothing else going on. So, but my point is this group that was putting on the camp is a popular club team here in the city, and we were so close once that camp wrapped up to joining their club.
Hmm.
And I am so glad we didn't. Not because there's anything wrong with their club, but it's very expensive, which to me screams exclusive.
Yeah.
And it was weird. I just felt like it was this natural pressure. They were like, we'd like to invite him to
Oh,
join the club. And
right.
then there was just this assumption that we had the money to afford it. You know what I mean? And anyway, we ended up finding another club, which was like literally an eighth of the price, an eighth of the price. That's an amazing group of kids, but it's just showed me how easily you can just slip right into that like very
Didn't-
expensive club.
Right. And they had that language down of like, we want to invite your son.
Invite.
So you feel like, oh, he's,
He's good.
special or he's really good, or which I'm sure he is, but it's like that
Uh
language
huh.
instead of like, would you like to sign up?
It makes you
It
feel
becomes
special.
right. And I think I like those couple things you brought up too, because I think those are important when considering like what sports to sign your kids up for is like location. You mentioned that one was right down the street. Like for us and our family, that's really important. Like we can have some sports like, well, just soccer is far away and it's like a commitment of time and resources to drive out there. And like the kids can't get there on their own, which is a big deal.
Yeah.
So we really try to then have sports where it's hyper local And in Santa Fe, it's harder because there's not that many fields and there's certainly not many clubs. But lacrosse is something that happens close by, so the girls can ride up there. And so it's really, I think, to think about location, like how far are you driving your kids and
Yeah.
how much time in the car, that's time that you as a human adult aren't moving your body, right? Like, so that's time when you can't like take care of yourself in the physical way you need to. And if you have lots of kids, maybe that's time that the other kids have to ride with you. So you have this dynamic where one child is playing and like 4 or 5 other members of the family are just like riding in the car.
Oh,
So
totally.
that's something to think about, is like just how far is it? And cost, I think, is a really big indicator of like, is this a reasonable cost? If this is like not a big financial output or big commitment, it's so much easier to sign up. It sends a message too, like this is a child sport. Like this is not like, we're trying to get a scholarship to like
Yes.
Division I, right? Like this, and so looking at those two factors to, and using those to help you make your decision. And it sounds like you really went with your gut on that, and then it turned out to be the right move, because there's usually always another option. You just have to sort of look around.
You have to look.
You have to look. And then I spoke to a writer last year who, oh my gosh, I'm going to forget this name, but was it Karen Krause? I think so. She wrote a great book called Norwich, and it's based on this town in Norwich, Vermont, that produced a lot of really talented Olympians from this one town in Vermont. I think it was Vermont, or maybe it was Vermont. And she was looking at sort of their stories, and almost to an athlete, they did not specialize early. So they had a wide range of experiences. They became very competent and confident as in themselves as athletes, without being labeled a specific, soccer player or skier, right? Like they were an athlete, and that was kind of their mindset. But my point is that a lot of them also, their parents got involved in coaching, not because they were sort of that like overbearing soccer mom, but because quite the opposite, they were trying to create a scenario where it wasn't high pressure year-round sport. And so the author found that these parents who were willing to step in and say, I'm not seeing what I need for my child or a healthy approach to this sport currently on offer in our community, so I'm going to step in.
Wow.
And give time and energy and create the kind of sports culture that I think is healthy for a kid of this age. And actually, after I spoke to Karen and interviewed her, she'd be a great person for your show, by the way.
Okay.
I really took it to heart. And that's when I sort of stepped forward and was like, to my husband, Steve, like if we believe that our girls, we want them to be athletes, but we want it to be a healthy balance, and that we need to step in because we have this time and skills, or I had the skills to coach lacrosse and my husband has time. And so like her point was that you probably have either the skills, the time, or some money to create, if you're not seeing that coaching or team experience for your child, like maybe you can create it. And I like that. It just made me think of what you said, because it sounded like you weren't willing to just go all in with this one team, and you wanted to look around, and that is so smart.
Oh my gosh. I love that concept.
Right. Like, and you don't have to be great. Like my husband played lacrosse a little bit in New Jersey growing up, and I played, but it's just enough to get the kids out there playing, moving. Like I don't have the professional drills, like, it's sort of a little ragtag, but honestly, like it's so healthy for the girls. And, I was reading in that New York Times story that I was just mentioning yesterday in the Sunday paper about how, parents are grappling with sending their kids back. And the writer had found this one coach who videos every practice so that parents don't have to go and sit on the sidelines, right? They're trying to keep numbers down and distancing, which I think is so smart. But when I read that, of course, I was like, oh my God, a coach is videoing. Like,
and why do parents need to see the practice?
Like parents need to see the practice. Like, I mean, that Yeah, that is not me as a parent. I'm like, if my child is going to practice, like I'll watch a little bit, but then I'm out, right? Like I've
I'm
got
going to
speaking,
Target. I'm running an errand.
I'm going to go for a run.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it was just it was interesting, but I think that just goes to show there's like parents all along the spectrum. Like the parents who are just so all in on like my child's going to play team sports and go, to Division 1, and then obviously there's lots of kids who don't even get the opportunity. So, I think it's important to acknowledge that end of the spectrum too, that for some like team sports would be like they probably need more of it and more opportunities, and it's hard for lots of kids to get that. It's just financial, the cost, and yeah, so it's tricky on both ends.
Yeah, the accessibility is huge. I mean, the thought of joining that club, I mean, and how simple that would have been it for us. And I'm like, it just felt gross to me. It felt really gross,
Yeah,
and it felt gross to me for my kids. Not that they needed to know the price tag, but just
right.
that like it would be assumed that they're going to go do this like club that all these other kids do. I did not like any of that. Um, and actually, I think that's kind of been one of our bigger issues. We live close to downtown in the city, and there are tons of lower cost like clubbish sports in the suburbs that aren't like those like fancy club like
Right.
travel teams, but right in the city, unless you're talking about like a YMCA or something like that, there's not as many options. And so I had actually said something about that to my husband. I was like, well, someone needs to create it then.
Yeah.
um and
Well,
need
there you go. And so you don't need to be the one to create it, maybe, but you might go, like, you have a good network, right? Like, you might talk to other parents and be like, hey, here's this need. Do we know anyone who could help us create this?
yeah.
And that's that thing that goes on in that town in Vermont that, like, was so supportive of kids and, like, growing them as athletes, but in a really healthy, mindful way.
Yes, I love that so much. That can feel overwhelming too. I mean,
Totally.
it's just like problems in the school system and all these different things where you're like, well, you know what needs to happen? Parents need to get involved. And it can feel like a really big overwhelming problem, but I think just like taking that one step or getting like a core group of like 5 parents who want to
Right.
get involved together can make a big difference.
Well, like out here, my friend Megan, who's a physical therapist and my physical therapist, she, because we've had no sports, her kids she has 2 boys and they're really into soccer. And so she created just like a neighborhood group with like 4 other moms, and they do like mom v boys, to pick up soccer
Oh,
twice a week.
fun. The moms play the boys.
Yeah.
I
And
love
so
it.
that was something, right? She saw a need like there for her kids, and she organized it loosely. And yeah, I think sometimes it gets overly complicated, and certainly like where I live in Santa Fe, there's so many fewer options, so things are naturally less complicated. But it sounds like in a larger city like where you live, there's a lot of options, and it can feel like, oh, this is our only option, we have to do it. And then you'd probably be sucked in, and like he'd probably be going down the path to being like year-round soccer player. You
Oh,
know what
for
I mean?
sure, for sure. Well, and also just last note on the I love the mom that that created that experience in her neighborhood, because I have found in COVID times, the people that we have been around and surrounded ourselves with have been our neighbors, which is amazing. And I see.
That's important.
Right. And I mean, that in general, that's how we live in our community. But I see my neighbors and my kids see the neighbor friends way more than I actually see my extended family. And so if you're going to expose yourself and be outside playing sports with other people, like your neighbors probably make the most sense because that's who you're naturally around physically anyway.
Right. And it does seem like, yeah, just seeing your social feed, like it does seem like you have that more neighborhoody experience and feeling where you live, which is so great. So I think if anyone listening has that, and it's like you live in a neighborhood with sidewalks and where there are kids living nearby, like and maybe that scene with the kids isn't happening, maybe there's something you can do to help foster that. You know what I mean? And like lots of people, like we have some kids in our neighborhood, and but it's not as conducive. But I think that's a good segue into like, I do want to say that to balance out like the organized team sport is that free play component that's so important for kids. And so for us, that looks like our girls going out riding their bikes, and riding to a friend's house. Or my older one is now can meet a friend and go mountain biking on a trail. It's like a 45 or 50-minute ride. And so letting kids have some freedom around how they move and what they like to do and who they do it with is really important. And it's harder now. I mean, COVID's made it harder, but also just the way we live as families. More parents have two parents working, and there's fewer kids, I think, out on the move. Maybe not where you live. Are there lots of kids out kind of playing at all hours where you live?
Oh gosh. I think it's very weather dependent, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, and see, I think in a lot of places it's not even weather dependent. I think it's just not part of
Yeah.
how families raise kids anymore, is to like just go out and play. And so that's something that we've been really trying to create for our girls here. I think that it's possible, like parents listening, whether or not you have that sort of like idyllic cul-de-sac, with like 10 families on it. That's the kind of street I grew up on. And literally kids in every single house up and down the road. But I don't have that now. My girls don't have that, but you can still find ways to create it, which is like, we just take neighborhood bike rides, and we've been doing that since the girls were young, and we create this little route. And we find these little like sort of back alleys and passageways that we call secret passageways. And so they've done it enough with me that now like they'll just be like, we're going to go do the secret passageway route, or we're going to go ride over here. And it's totally possible. It's just a matter of like, you as a parent really need to spend time with your kids doing it, right? So that they become comfortable and you become comfortable with them doing it. So it's an investment of time. And I think honestly, that's why those organized sports are easier for some parents to stomach, because it's like, well, we'll just drop the kids off.
Yep.
But this sort of building them up or training them to have that freedom and independence takes a lot more time on the parents' end, right? It's like, let's ride this like 500 times together. I just threw that number out, but let's ride this a lot before I'll even think about you riding it by yourself. But then one day they'll be ready.
Yeah.
Be ready if you put in the work on the front end.
Yeah, I mean, I love the freedom that comes with the whole free play that you're talking about. And I mean, I think probably some people would be shocked at how young I let my kids run down the street 10 houses to the neighbors by themselves. But I also want to say too, you mentioned it looked like in my feed, if anybody follows me on social media, that we have a lot of like neighborhood friends and things like that. But I want to mention, like, that's so intentional. Like, I didn't just like stumble upon all these friends. You know what I mean? Like, I will literally, if I'm walking down the street and I see a younger family, like I will like go out of my way to like introduce myself and make sure, because I do want that. Like I strive for that so much. And I think it would be really easy to just say hello and keep walking.
Totally.
But also I've struggled with that in 2020, because I actually felt like, the year postpartum with my last baby, I felt like I was in this place where I just didn't have space to like bring on new friendships or anything like that. So I was like, these are my people, head down. Like, this is who I'm connected with. I don't have space to bring in more. And now that I feel like I'm kind of out of that phase and I'm ready to bring on new friends, COVID happens. And it's like so frustrating, because you can't really like venture out and bring all these new people into your family so much.
Right. I love what you said. It's intentional, and like you are creating that experience that you want for your family, which is like to meet new people and introduce and to have a relationship with your neighbors. And even if it's in COVID and it's now from afar with a mask
From afar,
on,
yeah.
Like for us, a family moved in down the street, and Pippa knows the daughter from lacrosse, and it's just so nice because I'm like, well, we know she's down there, so sometimes I'll be like, just why don't you walk down and see her, or I can text her mom, and you guys can go for a walk with your masks on, and but it would also be easy to just wave at them and never connect that way. But we need to sort of model that kind of behavior for our kids and show them that like actually what it means to be a neighbor is to reach out and to visit in a way that feels comfortable to both, and to really like live where you are, if that makes sense. Like have your place, which means knowing your neighbors, and even if they're like older, like know that this woman lives here and she walks her dog, and it also helps because then if your kids are out on their own and need someone,
Totally.
like you're familiar, right? Like it's sort of like I think of it as like mapping our neighborhood, and it's like who lives there, and like making the kids learn how to be aware, right, of like their surroundings and who's out, and oh, there's that person walking the dog, they always walk it at this hour, and just help them become more observant, which I think also helps give them some protection in the world, like if they're aware of their surroundings and who's out there. Everyone's like, oh, how do you send your kids out without a phone? And it's partly because we've talked about, if you need help, go here.
Yes.
Or libraries, I mean, everything's different in COVID, right? Things aren't open, but like if you need help, you can knock on this door. Or if you're downtown, go into the library, or and like honestly, it's good to have those conversations as the kids get older of scenarios and like what would you do if. And so I think it's just helping kids be a little bit more durable and independent in the world.
Oh, I 100% agree with that. All right, Katie. Well, this has just been fun. I hope that we've encouraged you listeners to, try something new for yourself and for your kids, and to do it your way. Not the way I'm doing it, not the way Katie's doing it, not the way your neighbor's doing it. There's no one way to do it.
That is really well said. There's no one way, there's no right way or wrong way. And it's just, like do it the way that feels right for your family and your kids and yourself, right? Because the parents have to factor in too, like just what you were saying about not chauffeuring your kids all over, right? Like there's balance.
For sure. All right, Katie. Well, thank you for your time, and we'll do it again sometime.
That was really fun. Thanks, Lindsay, and take care. Have fun out there.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in today. Thanks, Katie, for joining us once again on the podcast and for sharing all that great information. I value everything we talked about so much and truly look up to you as a mentor in motherhood. Don't forget, you can find Katie on Instagram. She is Katie Arnold over there. On Twitter, she is Raising Rippers. You can find us, this podcast, on Instagram. It's called Why Is Everyone Yelling? We have a Facebook group as well where we'd love to connect with you, called Why Is Everyone Yelling? And if you'd like to connect with me personally, my Instagram is lindsayhine626. And my Twitter is @LindsayHine. I am grateful for you. I am excited for this new year and all the great guests that are coming up on this show. We've got Wendy Snyder, who is a positive parenting expert, someone I really look up to. I've talked to her several times in the past on the Illuminate podcast, and I knew I had to bring her on this show. As well as Ralphie from Simply on Purpose. She is like the most requested guest for this show. I also have an episode with Ginny from 1000 Hours Outside. I'm super excited about that one. Those will all be rolling out in the coming weeks. All right, friends. Thanks for being here. Have a really great rest of your day, and we will see you next week.